Have you ever looked at your blood pressure reading, felt relieved by one number, and completely missed the warning hidden in the other? If you're over 60, what you're about to learn could change the way you interpret every blood pressure reading from this day forward, because the number most seniors worry about is often not the one creating the greatest danger. Even more concerning, thousands of older adults are reassured every day by readings that may actually be signaling an increased risk of stroke, heart failure, memory decline, and emergency hospitalization. The truth is that blood pressure after 60 doesn't follow the same rules it did when you were younger, and misunderstanding that difference can quietly put your health at risk for years before any obvious symptoms appear. Right now, somewhere, a senior is looking at a reading of 168/72 and feeling relatively calm because the lower number doesn't seem alarming. At the same time, another person is seeing 124/58 and feeling proud because the top number appears well controlled. Yet both individuals may be missing important warning signs. That's because blood pressure isn't simply about whether a number is high or low. It's about understanding which number is changing, why it's changing, and what those changes reveal about what's happening inside your body as you age. The real danger often lies in the pattern, not just the individual numbers. Before we go any further, I want you to stay with me until the end because by the time we're finished, you'll understand which blood pressure number usually becomes the most important after age 60, which reading pattern creates a false sense of security for many seniors, and which numbers should never be ignored because they may require immediate medical attention. The answer isn't as simple as deciding whether the top number is good or the bottom number is bad. In older adults, the entire picture changes, and that's exactly why so many people misunderstand their risk. Take Martha, for example. At 71 years old, she was careful, responsible, and committed to monitoring her health. Every morning, she checked her blood pressure and carefully recorded the results in a notebook she kept beside her morning coffee. Week after week, her readings looked remarkably similar. One day it was 162/74. Another day it was 166/70. Then 164. Looking at those nubbin tubers, Martha kept telling herself the same thing. The bottom number doesn't look that bad, so maybe this isn't something to worry about. She felt mostly normal. There was some fatigue. She noticed getting slightly out of breath while climbing stairs, but nothing felt urgent enough to raise serious concern. Then one afternoon, while folding laundry, something frightening happened. Her right hand suddenly became weak. Her speech briefly became difficult to control. Within less than a minute, everything returned to normal. Because the symptoms disappeared so quickly, she nearly ignored them. What Martha experienced was a transient ischemic attack, often called a warning stroke, and the blood pressure pattern she had been dismissing for weeks had been signaling danger the entire time. The consistently elevated top number, combined with a seemingly acceptable lower number, wasn't harmless at all. It was one of the most common and dangerous blood pressure patterns seen in older adults. Unfortunately, she misunderstood its significance because nobody had clearly explained which number mattered most at her age. To understand why this happens, we first need to understand what those two numbers actually represent. The top number, known as systolic pressure, measures the force inside your arteries when your heart contracts and pumps blood throughout your body. The bottom number, called diastolic pressure, measures the pressure inside those arteries when your heart relaxes between beats. Both numbers matter. Both can become dangerous. But after age 60, something important begins to change. And that change starts inside your arteries themselves. What happens next explains why the top number often becomes the most important warning sign seniors should never ignore. If you're finding this information valuable so far, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment below, and turn on notifications because the next part reveals the hidden reason aging changes blood pressure risk, and why so many seniors never see the danger coming until it's almost too late. The reason so many seniors misunderstand their blood pressure risk begins with a simple reality that most people never hear explained clearly. The body measuring blood pressure at 65, 75, or 85 is not the same body that measured it at 35. As we age, our arteries gradually lose some of the flexibility they once had. When we're younger, these blood vessels are more elastic. They stretch and expand when the heart pumps blood, helping absorb pressure and reduce strain throughout the cardiovascular system. But over time, those arteries become stiffer. They don't expand as easily, and they can't cushion the force of blood flow the way they once did. As a result, every heartbeat sends a stronger pressure wave through the circulatory system. That increased force pushes the systolic number higher and higher. Meanwhile, the diastolic number may remain stable or even begin to decrease. This creates a blood pressure pattern that becomes extremely common after age 60, a high top number paired with a normal or lower bottom number. Doctors call this isolated systolic hypertension, and it is one of the most overlooked threats facing older adults. This is where many seniors make a dangerous mistake. They see a reading like 158/76 and immediately focus on the lower number. Since 76 doesn't appear alarming, they assume the entire reading must be acceptable. But that's often far from the truth. In older adults, that elevated systolic pressure can be signaling stiffening arteries, increased strain on the heart, growing stroke risk, and damage developing silently within blood vessels throughout the body. The lower number doesn't erase the danger created by the higher one. Robert learned this lesson the hard way. At 68, he considered himself healthy and active. After decades working as a contractor, he remained physically strong and believed serious health problems would announce themselves with obvious symptoms. His home blood pressure readings regularly landed around 154/78, 157/76, and occasionally 160/80. Month after month, he dismissed those numbers because he held on to a belief many seniors still share: if the bottom number isn't high, then the situation can't be that serious. Unfortunately, his heart disagreed. Over time, the constant pressure forced his heart muscle to work harder with every beat. Gradually, the heart began thickening as it pushed against that elevated systolic pressure day after day. The process happened quietly. There was no dramatic warning, no sudden pain, no obvious crisis. Just slow, steady strain accumulating beneath the surface. That's exactly why isolated systolic hypertension is so dangerous. It hides behind numbers that don't look frightening enough to demand attention. Many seniors glance at a bottom number under 80 and feel reassured, but what the top number may actually be saying is that the arteries are losing flexibility, the heart is under pressure, and the risk of future complications is steadily increasing. The damage doesn't happen overnight. It builds gradually until one day the consequences become impossible to ignore. However, before we go any further, there's something important to understand. If I stopped here, the story would still be incomplete. While a persistently elevated systolic number is often the most important long-term warning sign after age 60, it is not the most immediately dangerous blood pressure situation. There is another pattern that moves beyond future risk and enters emergency territory. This is where confusion can become life-threatening. Imagine checking your blood pressure and seeing a reading above 180/120. At that point, the conversation changes completely. We are no longer talking about risk over months or years. We're talking about a situation that may require immediate medical attention, especially if symptoms are present. That's exactly what happened to Rose. At 73 years old, Rose had always felt nervous when checking her blood pressure. One morning, she woke up with an intense headache centered behind her eyes. Concerned, she sat down at her kitchen table and wrapped the cuff around her arm. The screen displayed 186/118. Thinking there might be an error, she waited a few minutes and checked again. This time the reading was even higher, 192/121. Then something else happened. The vision in her left eye became blurry. At that moment, this was no longer a routine blood pressure check. It was a medical emergency developing in real time. The numbers, combined with her symptoms, suggested a hypertensive crisis that could potentially threaten the brain, heart, kidneys, or blood vessels. And what happened next reveals exactly why certain blood pressure readings should never be ignored, no matter how quickly they appear. If you're learning something valuable so far, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and stay with me, because the next part may help you recognize the difference between a warning sign and a true medical emergency before it's too late. Rose's situation highlights a distinction every senior needs to understand. A blood pressure reading above 180/120 is not something to casually monitor and discuss days later. When numbers reach that level and symptoms appear alongside them, the body may already be signaling that serious damage is occurring. Chest pain, shortness of breath, severe headache, weakness, numbness, confusion, vision changes, or difficulty speaking should never be ignored. These symptoms can indicate that vital organs are under immediate stress and require urgent medical evaluation. Too many older adults treat extremely high blood pressure readings like weather forecasts. They assume they can simply keep an eye on things and wait for tomorrow. But when blood pressure rises into those dangerous ranges, especially with symptoms every minute matters, stroke, heart attack, kidney injury, and damage to major blood vessels can develop rapidly. This is why medical professionals consider such situations emergencies rather than routine health concerns. Now here's where things become even more interesting. While an extremely high diastolic pressure can absolutely be dangerous during a crisis, many seniors are surprised to learn that outside of emergency situations, the bottom number often becomes less important than the top number as we age. This shift catches countless people off guard because they spend decades believing the lower number is the primary one to watch. But aging changes the rules. As arteries become stiffer, systolic pressure increasingly becomes the stronger indicator of cardiovascular risk. Doctors aren't ignoring the diastolic number. Rather, they understand that the physiology of aging changes how blood pressure behaves. The danger begins moving upward, yet many seniors continue using outdated assumptions about which number deserves the most attention. Leonard was one of them. At 76 years old, Leonard was meticulous about his health. Every morning and evening he checked his blood pressure and carefully recorded the results. His notebook was filled with readings like 158/68, 162/70, and 160/69. Looking at those numbers, he felt reassured because his diastolic pressure almost always stayed below 80. For decades, he had been taught that the lower number was the one that mattered most. What Leonard didn't realize was that another important clue was hiding in plain sight. That clue was something called pulse pressure. Pulse pressure is simply the difference between the top and bottom numbers. If your reading is 160/70, your pulse pressure is 90. If it's 150/80, your pulse pressure is 70. While many people never pay attention to this measurement, it can reveal important information about the condition of aging arteries. As arteries stiffen, pulse pressure often widens. The top number climbs while the bottom number remains stable or falls. That growing gap can indicate that the cardiovascular system is under increasing strain. Think of it this way. Younger arteries act like flexible shock absorbers. They help soften the force generated by each heartbeat. Older, stiffer arteries lose much of that ability. As a result, pressure rises more dramatically with each heartbeat, creating a wider separation between systolic and diastolic readings. This is why a reading like 166/62 can be far more concerning than it initially appears. Most people immediately focus on the 62 and think, at least the lower number isn't high. But that large gap between 166 and 62 may actually be revealing significant arterial stiffness and increasing cardiovascular risk. The heart is pumping against vessels that can no longer absorb pressure effectively. Over time, that strain can affect the heart, brain, kidneys, and circulation throughout the body. One person who experienced this firsthand was Helen. At 80 years old, Helen remained fiercely independent. She drove herself everywhere, managed her own errands, attended church regularly, and took pride in maintaining an active lifestyle. Over the years, she noticed her blood pressure readings gradually changing. What once averaged around 138/82 eventually became 152/74. Later, it reached 164/60. Instead of becoming concerned, Helen felt encouraged. She saw the lower number dropping and assumed things were improving. In her mind, lower automatically meant better. Unfortunately, that wasn't what was happening at all. The declining diastolic pressure wasn't necessarily a sign of better cardiovascular health. Meanwhile, her systolic pressure continued climbing and her pulse pressure kept widening. Together, those changes were telling a very different story about what was happening inside her arteries. And the symptoms that eventually followed would reveal just how misleading those numbers had become. If this information is helping you understand your own readings in a new way, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me, because the next part uncovers one of the most overlooked blood pressure dangers seniors face: the risk that can appear when the bottom number falls too low. The symptoms didn't arrive all at once. For Helen, they appeared gradually, quietly enough to be dismissed as normal aging. First came the fatigue. Then she found herself short of breath after walking distances that had never bothered her before. Soon, simple tasks like carrying groceries from the car felt more exhausting than they should. Eventually, occasional dizziness began creeping into her afternoons, forcing her to steady herself using nearby furniture. Like many seniors, Helen assumed she was simply slowing down. But her blood pressure readings had been telling a different story all along. The widening gap between her systolic and diastolic numbers reflected growing arterial stiffness and increasing cardiovascular strain. Her heart had been working harder for years without her realizing it. The monitor wasn't failing to warn her. She simply wasn't looking at the right part of the message, and that's where many older adults find themselves today. They focus on the lower number because that's what they've heard about for decades. Meanwhile, the top number keeps climbing, pulse pressure keeps widening, and important warning signs remain hidden in plain sight. But just when it seems the story is only about high blood pressure, another twist appears, one that surprises almost everyone. Sometimes the danger isn't that blood pressure is too high. Sometimes the danger is that part of it becomes too low. This is where the conversation becomes far more complex than most internet articles or casual health discussions suggest. Because after age 60, especially among people taking blood pressure medication, lowering the numbers too aggressively can sometimes create an entirely different problem. Arthur discovered this firsthand. At 74 years old, he was determined to improve his health. He adopted a healthier diet, lost weight, became more active, and followed his treatment plan exactly as prescribed. His dedication paid off. His blood pressure numbers improved significantly. On paper, everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. His readings often looked like 126/56, sometimes 122/54, other days 128/58. Most people would look at those numbers and immediately congratulate him. But Arthur didn't feel healthy. He felt dizzy when standing up. He felt weak during his morning routine. Trips to the grocery store became unexpectedly exhausting. At times, he felt lightheaded for no obvious reason. Instead of feeling stronger, he felt increasingly unstable. The confusion was understandable. After all, weren't lower blood pressure numbers supposed to be better? Not necessarily. This is one of the most important concepts seniors rarely hear explained. The heart itself receives much of its blood supply during the relaxation phase between heartbeats. That phase corresponds to the diastolic pressure, the bottom number on the monitor. If that pressure drops too low, especially in older adults whose arteries may already be narrowed or stiffened, blood flow to the heart muscle can become less than ideal. This doesn't mean everyone with a diastolic pressure in the high 50s is automatically in danger. What it means is that context matters, symptoms matter, individual health conditions matter, and the body's response matters. A blood pressure reading should never be judged in isolation. Numbers alone cannot tell the entire story. How those numbers interact with your symptoms and overall health is equally important. That's why a diastolic pressure consistently below 60 deserves attention, particularly when accompanied by dizziness, weakness, balance problems, fatigue, or falls. Those symptoms may be the body's way of signaling that something isn't quite right. This is where blood pressure management becomes more nuanced and more honest than many people expect. The internet loves simple answers. It wants one villain. It wants someone to declare that the top number is always dangerous or that the bottom number is always dangerous. Real life doesn't work that way. For most seniors over 60, the systolic number remains the strongest indicator of long-term cardiovascular risk. Extremely elevated readings represent immediate danger. And very low diastolic pressure can create its own set of problems when it interferes with healthy circulation. In other words, blood pressure management is not about obsessing over a single number. It's about understanding patterns. It's about recognizing how the numbers work together. And it's about paying attention to what your body is telling you. If someone asked for the simplest possible answer to the question, which blood pressure reading is most dangerous after age 60? The response would be this: persistently elevated systolic pressure is usually the most common long-term threat. Blood pressure above 180/120 with symptoms is the most urgent emergency, and high systolic pressure combined with very low diastolic pressure can become one of the most deceptive patterns of all. That deceptive combination fools countless seniors because one number appears reassuring while the other quietly signals risk. And understanding that distinction may be one of the most important things you can do to protect your health. But there's still another critical piece of this puzzle that many people miss entirely. In the next part, We'll uncover why blood pressure management isn't simply about lowering numbers, how treatment can sometimes create unexpected problems, and what every senior should watch for before assuming their readings are truly under control. If you're finding this helpful, subscribe, leave a comment below, and stay with me because what comes next could completely change how you evaluate your own blood pressure readings. The biggest mistake seniors make with blood pressure isn't failing to check it. It's assuming that a good-looking number automatically means good health. That's where countless people get misled. They see improvement on the monitor, celebrate the result, and never stop to ask a crucial question: does my body actually feel better? Nancy learned why that question matters. At 69 years old, she had a powerful reason to take blood pressure seriously. Her mother suffered a stroke at 72, and ever since, Nancy had been determined to avoid the same fate. She monitored her readings faithfully and paid close attention to every change. Whenever she saw a reading like 148/64, she focused intensely on the elevated top number. Then, after a medication adjustment, her readings dropped to around 122/58. Naturally, she felt relieved. The top number looked excellent. The goal appeared accomplished. But within weeks, something unexpected happened. She started experiencing dizziness. Standing up too quickly made her feel unstable. Some days she felt mentally foggy and unusually tired. She blamed stress, poor sleep, and aging. What she didn't realize was that her blood pressure treatment had improved one part of the equation while potentially creating challenges elsewhere. The numbers had changed. Balance had not, and balance is ultimately what good blood pressure management is all about. For seniors, treatment isn't simply about forcing blood pressure as low as possible. The goal is reducing risk while maintaining healthy circulation, preserving energy, protecting cognitive function, preventing falls, and supporting independence. Lower numbers aren't automatically better if they leave you dizzy, weak, or unable to function safely throughout your day. That's why managing blood pressure after 60 requires a more individualized approach than many younger adults need. The objective isn't just lower. The objective is safer. And safety depends on much more than a single reading. It depends on patterns. It depends on symptoms. It depends on consistency. Most importantly, it depends on how your body responds over time. There's another reason doctors pay such close attention to elevated systolic pressure in older adults, and it involves one of the organs people fear losing the most: the brain. Every heartbeat sends blood through an incredibly delicate network of tiny vessels inside the brain. When systolic pressure remains elevated for years, those small vessels are repeatedly exposed to greater force and stress. Over time, that strain may contribute not only to stroke risk, but also to changes affecting memory, thinking, and overall cognitive function. This is one reason high blood pressure has earned the nickname, the silent killer. The damage often develops quietly. There may be no warning pain, no obvious symptoms, no dramatic signs. The process unfolds gradually while a person continues feeling completely normal. That's exactly why so many seniors lose valuable time. They wait for symptoms. But symptoms often arrive late. A person can walk around for years with systolic readings consistently in the 150s or even 160s while feeling perfectly fine. No headaches, no chest discomfort, no alarming sensations. The body adapts just enough to disguise the danger. Unfortunately, adaptation is not the same thing as protection. Feeling normal does not guarantee that blood pressure is safe. The monitor measures what is happening inside your cardiovascular system, not how dramatic the situation feels in the moment. This brings us to one of the most common misconceptions doctors hear from older patients. Many seniors ask a version of the same question. My top number is high, but my bottom number is low. Doesn't that sort of balance things out? The answer is no. One number does not cancel the other. A high systolic pressure remains important even when the diastolic pressure looks acceptable. Likewise, a very low diastolic pressure can still deserve attention even when the systolic number appears improved. In seniors, the relationship between the two numbers often tells a much bigger story than either number alone. That's why patterns matter far more than isolated readings. One elevated measurement after a stressful day doesn't necessarily mean disaster. One unexpectedly low reading doesn't automatically mean something is wrong. But when those patterns repeat day after day and week after week, your body is communicating valuable information. The key is learning how to listen. Watch for consistently elevated systolic pressure. Pay attention if the diastolic number repeatedly drops below 60 and you're experiencing symptoms. Notice whether the gap between the two numbers continues widening over time. And never ignore extremely high readings accompanied by concerning symptoms. These patterns reveal far more than a single snapshot ever could, because blood pressure management after 60 is not a game of chasing one perfect number. It's about understanding the complete picture. And in the next part, we'll bring everything together by exposing one of the most dangerous forms of reassurance in medicine, why familiar readings are often the easiest to ignore, and the 3 blood pressure truths every senior should remember for the rest of their life. If you're getting value from this information, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and make sure you stay until the very end because the final part may completely change how you interpret every blood pressure reading from now on. There's a reason so many serious blood pressure problems go unnoticed for months or even years. It's not because people never check their numbers. It's because the most dangerous readings are often the ones that start to feel familiar. Human beings have a remarkable ability to normalize patterns, even unhealthy ones. When a senior sees similar blood pressure readings day after day, those numbers stop feeling like warnings and start feeling normal. And that false sense of reassurance can become one of the greatest risks of all. In medicine, panic gets a lot of attention. But false reassurance can be just as dangerous. Panic may push someone to seek medical help. False reassurance encourages people to sit still while silent damage continues. A person sees 156/68 and thinks, at least the bottom number looks fine. Another sees 124/58 and says, at least the top number is under control. In both situations, important information may be getting overlooked. That's because blood pressure danger after age 60 often hides inside readings that appear half normal and half concerning. One number creates comfort while the other quietly signals risk. Unless you understand how those numbers work together, it's easy to underestimate what's really happening. Denise experienced exactly that problem. At 67 years old, she rarely missed a medical appointment and considered herself reasonably health conscious. Her blood pressure readings consistently hovered around 152/66. Because those numbers became familiar, she stopped paying much attention to them. She viewed them as only slightly abnormal and assumed there wasn't much reason for concern. Months passed. Then one day, something changed. While carrying groceries from her car, she became unusually short of breath. Tasks that once felt effortless suddenly seemed more demanding. Further evaluation eventually revealed that her heart had been working under greater strain than anyone initially realized. The problem wasn't one isolated reading. The problem was the pattern, a pattern that had been underestimated for nearly a year. And that's the lesson every senior should remember. The most dangerous blood pressure reading is often not the one that looks frightening at first glance. It's the one that becomes familiar enough to ignore. So before we finish, let's bring everything together in the clearest way possible. First, if you're over 60, a persistently elevated systolic pressure, the top number, is usually the most important long-term warning sign. This is especially true when readings repeatedly stay above 140 or continue rising into the 150s and 160s. Even if the lower number looks acceptable, the top number may be revealing increasing arterial stiffness, cardiovascular strain, and elevated stroke risk. Second, blood pressure readings above 180/120 accompanied by symptoms such as chest pain, severe headache, confusion, vision changes, weakness, numbness, difficulty speaking, or shortness of breath should be treated as medical emergencies. Those situations require immediate professional attention because serious complications may already be developing. Third, a low diastolic pressure deserves attention when it drops too far and is accompanied by symptoms. Dizziness, weakness, balance problems, fatigue, lightheadedness, and falls are never details to ignore. The goal of treatment is not simply to lower numbers. The goal is to improve health while maintaining safe circulation and quality of life. And finally, pay attention to pulse pressure. A widening gap between the top and bottom numbers often reveals important changes in arterial health. It's not just a mathematical difference. It's often a clue about how aging is affecting the cardiovascular system. Once you understand these realities, blood pressure stops looking like two random numbers on a screen. Instead, it becomes a powerful warning system. It can reveal whether arteries are becoming stiffer, whether the heart is working harder, whether treatment is balanced properly, and whether health risks are increasing or improving over time. Most importantly, remember this: never ask which number you can ignore. Ask what pattern your body is feeling. Track your readings consistently. Pay attention to symptoms. Share the complete picture with your doctor. And don't allow a seemingly reassuring number to distract you from a warning sign hiding elsewhere in the reading. Because the most dangerous blood pressure is often not the one that looks the scariest. It's the one that's misunderstood long enough to be ignored. If this video helped you understand blood pressure in a completely new way, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with a friend or family member over 60 who needs to hear this information. Leave a comment below and tell us what your biggest takeaway was. Your support helps us continue creating content that empowers people to protect their health, stay independent, and make informed decisions. And remember, the more you understand your numbers today, the better prepared you'll be to protect your future tomorrow. Turn on notifications so you never miss another life-changing health insight.